Hello and welcome to today's video. I'm Golden Gat. If you haven't met me before, I do League of Legends content with some casting on the side, as well as now pretty much full-time One Piece TCG content whenever I get the time. And yeah, I'm also been competing, having a lot of fun with that, which I do have a bit of an update here. Excuse my dog barking in the background, but I did end up winning a treasure cup. Well, a store treasure cup, so not one of those big ones, one of those smaller, more local ones, and I was able to actually acquire this Sanji card, which you see right here, or I guess pudding card. It's a Charlotte pudding from OP08, and I was able to secure this with my victory using the leader Odin. So, you know, you'll see my takes here for the EB02 discussion here, as far as where I place all these leaders and what I think of how these leaders are performing and stuff like that. I will have a tier list here in this video as well. And yeah, I'm going to go through every leader, and then I'm also going to talk about my own personal experience playing EB02 and what leaders I'm really not pioneering, but more like really pining to play and really try and get in there and do some damage. So let's get right into it. So, welcome to the EB02 meta discussion. Obviously, this is going to be a pretty interesting one with, you could see the front page here of our screen here. We got Monkey D. Luffy, green-purple Luffy, of course, from EB02, and Shanks, which I really think these two are kind of the decks that will be running most tournaments for the most part, but there's definitely going to be some spice, and we'll just get right into it. So, this is EB02. Obviously, GP Luffy is really all the talk, and everyone's saying, oh, is this deck Tier 0? I don't think so, personally. I think it lacks the consistency that you'd expect of a Tier 0 deck. There are games that can slip away, and there's leaders that do beat GP Luffy quite definitively. So, either way, let's get right into this one with the tier list for EB02. So, this is my list. We're going to go through each and every leader. This is ordered, so just to note, I kind of went through all these tiers and ordered out what I think people and leaders are performing at, and you'll see some spicy takes here and there. But for the most part, I think I did a pretty good job. I took a lot of time just to really think about this. I thought about win rates and stuff like that and matchup spreads. So let's just get right into it. So let's start at the top. Tier 1 meta leader. We got GP Luffy obviously at the top. I still think, even if there's some consistency issues, this is the leader to beat. And a lot of people are playing it because it's a pretty fun leader, and since, you know, it's so hyped to be so so solid, especially going into OP11, which is right around the corner, by the way. I think a lot of people are trying to pick it up and get as many reps as possible. So GP Luffy, I think, I don't have to tell you how strong this leader is. Sanji and Pudding make this deck a menace, and if you can't answer Sanji Pudding in some way, shape, or form, you're probably not going to do that well in this meta. That being said, there are ways around it. There are things that definitely work into it, stuff like Bonnie, a little bit more defensively, but you're still able to really apply kind of defensive pressure on the Luffy to kind of put him on a timer. Because if Kid comes down, trust me, it's very difficult for GP Luffy with what he currently techs to be able to get through a Bonnie kind of stalwart defense. But besides that, a lot of decks are kind of targeting GP Luffy, which is why I feel like he can't be Tier 0. We got Control Shanks, so obviously that's the Red Force build with some Building Snakes, as well as Beckman, Rayleigh, the usual, but also a lot more 10-drop of the KO Shanks 10k. That card, really good into GP, and honestly, it's kind of changed Shanks a little bit, where before you really wanted to go second so you can drop 10-drop Rush Shanks as soon as possible on top of people's foreheads, but now playing a little bit more control, actually going first may even be better for Shanks, which is honestly pretty good because GP is going to want second anyways, so now the dice roll doesn't really matter anyways for the Shanks. So I think Shanks is in a pretty good position and really is the biggest threat to GP Luffy as a deck. Next we have Lucci, you know, stuff like that. You know, just KO's a 7. It doesn't matter that it's 7. You could still hit that number pretty easily with Lucci, especially since this deck is a little more consistent without Gecko Moria. So overall, I just think GP Luffy is going to have a pretty difficult time, with his main benefit being he destroys Blackbeard and most rogue leaders that aren't just specifically targeting that leader. So, you know, definitely a little bit scary if you're GP, since everyone's got a target on your back, and since he's not as consistent as you know, leaders of the past that were tier 0, so stuff like OG Whitebeard or Trafalgar Law, the red purple, or maybe Sakazuki. Those leaders definitely were a cut above, where even if you are playing a counter, you probably still have a bad matchup. But you're playing for like the 45% matchup. Whereas I think GP does have some matchups where he is just down. So definitely an interesting one. And just know you will be seeing him a lot more going forward. Next we have Shanks. So Shanks, I think the big thing about Shanks has always been the flexibility of this leader, being able to go minus 1k into stuff like GP Luffy, who by the way is a 6k leader. I didn't even mention that, but being a 6k leader really does change your gameplay, because your defensive ability is a lot better. But Shanks can kind of neutralize that a little bit. Yeah, he's not getting the free value he used to get into 5k leaders, but making a 6k leader a 5k when that's one of their biggest strengths definitely does benefit the Shanks. And then on top of that, Shanks gets to run the new control build. Your power-based removal cannot really be defended upon if you are playing Luffy. So that really puts him in a good position. I think his matchup spread is just really solid across the board. He still beats Blackbeard to some degree. Yes, it's going to be a little bit harder with control. I think at the end of the day, if Shanks texts in a couple rush cards, maybe Blackbeard's still a good matchup, but I think that could be maybe his one weakness, as well as Bonnie, of course. Bonnie's always one of those leaders that most players don't want to see, because Bonnie is, yes, inconsistent. So seeing her tournament results, it's not that impressive as a leader, but it's something you have to respect at all times, because if Bonnie even goes a normal amount of luck in the game, it's going to be very difficult for most leaders in the game. So Shanks has those difficulties, but he cleans up so much more of the meta than some of these other leaders. So beats GP and then maybe loses to some of the top leaders, but besides that, he's kind of chilling. I'm not going to lie. So definitely Shanks up there in that tier 1. I initially, when I came into EB02, I thought it would be a triangle format with GP beats Blackbeard, Blackbeard beats Shanks, and Shanks beats GP Luffy. But that didn't end up shaking out as much as I thought. I think Blackbeard's matchup into GP is just so rough that I haven't really seen people really piloting the deck as much as I thought it would be piloted. He's still up there in tier 1 because he, of course, is still Blackbeard, still has good matchups into a lot of the meta. But just the idea that GP is so bad for Blackbeard, I think really discourages people from playing it since it's so present. So he's kind of been knocked down a little bit, and we got our favorite tiger, Cougar? I don't even know. I think Cougar, right? Either way, Leopard, that's it. Our favorite Leopard man, Lucci. Still in tier 1 after receiving now his 5th ban card with the removal of Ice Age and Gecko Moria in the last ban wave. Everyone thought, oh, the downfall of Lucci. Well, guess who's back with yet another disgusting build? I mean, he's once again has some bad matchups. Of course he does. Like Reiju, still difficult. And some of these other more floody rush character decks. But Lucci is still Lucci. You know, you are able to remove Sanji Pudding very easily. It doesn't matter if they're +2 from the Merry Go, which, by the way, I didn't even talk about that. That definitely changes a lot of GP Luffy's matchups, which is kind of why he's able to get away with what he gets away with. But Lucci doesn't really care too much. And then on top of that, Lucci does do pretty well into a lot of other matchups. So I think he's just in a good spot. I think there will be a lot more Lucci in the next couple weeks. I think first week people are kind of scared of playing Lucci, but I think as the weeks go on in EB02 and really get to a more mature meta, it'll be a lot more Lucci than prior. I don't have too many thoughts since I don't actually play the leader that much, so we'll just move on. I do think he is at that level, however. I will put one caveat, though. Lucci used to be good into NL, and I think NL wins now. Without the Ice Age, it is so much less consistent to be able to remove the 10 drops. And, you know, before it would be like, okay, if I remove their ace, they have no way of healing again. But NL now can just sit behind these 2 10-drop NLs and not really give a damn about what Lucci's trying to remove, because he could just play out another one. So I think in this current state of the meta, NL actually kind of beats Lucci, which is a much different look than it was just a couple months ago. So that's, I mean, you'll see NL's top of tier 1.5. That is no accident. That's for sure. And next we got Bonnie, obviously defensive queen. There's really no one that does it as well as her. Being able to rest down a character regardless of cost is just extremely powerful. And you have options such as Hody Jones. You get to get rest down some Dawn to actually go for lethal onto these GP Luffys, since once GP Luffy gets through a lot of his 2Ks, he really does not have much counter. All of it then is reliant on that Gum Gum Giant, and if you're able to get through some of those blockers, very easy for Bonnie, suddenly you are golden, and you're able to look for game in some unique scenarios. On top of that, there isn't too many big threats into Bonnie. Like, you know, she has some rough matchups, but I think along with Shanks, they are really the... Well, Shanks, I think, just has positive matchups into most decks, but I think Bonnie is kind of like the 50-50er of this meta, where she has a ton of 50-50 matchups, where you can win, you can lose, depending on how you kind of draw out, but just having the flexibility of being able to bunker. By the way, Kid is an 8k body, and GP Luffy, unless you're running Gamma Knife, has no way of reducing that. So if you put, you know, Kid down, GP Luffy has to commit so much Dawn to swing 8k into it that it actually becomes pretty difficult to actually get through that bunker. I will say, yes, you get to rest down blockers as GP Luffy, so you can get rid of stuff like the Rosinante 2 cost, but you can't even swing into it. So if you can't deal with Kid on the turn it's played, good freaking luck as that GP Luffy player. So definitely a scary matchup there, and I think Bonnie... I think more people should be playing this, but honestly, don't. Please don't. Please don't. I don't want to play against more Bonnie. Bonnie's one of those matchups that I just don't want to see if I sit down at a table, you know? So, I'll put her in Tier 1. I won't elaborate too much more. I think she's extremely powerful. Even more powerful than she was in the last meta. Just because of how prevalent green having access to Hody Jones is. So we'll have to see how that actually pans out, if she once again will just be kind of like the bridesmaid leader that doesn't end up winning anything again. But I really do think she could do some damage here. Next we got Blackbeard, everyone's favorite leader to play against. Of course, you have no on-plays into him whenever he does pitch a card, so generally just a great leader. Yes, he has rough matchups, but the matchups he wins dominantly. The matchups he loses pretty handedly, so... It's one of those leaders where if you see the right matchups in the day, you could really win. The problem is his GP Luffy matchup, which I'd say GP Luffy, as far as presence, is probably sitting at around 40%, maybe 35%. So that's a little bit scary since you have almost a 50% chance of running into at least 2 in like a 8 game tournament, for instance, to actually make it to the end. It just seems unlikely, but... You know, you still beat stuff like Shanks, you still beat stuff like NL. Lucci is still pretty difficult as well for that matchup, so I think Blackbeard's still in a pretty good spot. I think if you can beat 2 out of the top 5 leaders, you're in a good spot completely in this meta. I think if you could beat GP Luffy, Shanks, Lucci, Bonnie, or Blackbeard, 2 out of those 5, you're in a good spot. So Blackbeard being able to beat 2 out of the 5... Maybe 3 if you get lucky on the Bonnie, but generally not. I'm just gonna say that right now. Yeah, it could be pretty difficult for some of these other leaders. So next, we're gonna move on to Tier 1.5. Obviously, this video is unfortunately gonna be a lot more talking. There isn't too much to show here, just because I want to get through all these leaders. We got NL. NL, of course. That's a guy. That's a guy right there. He is pretty consistent, you know. I will say that, like, he's got everything you really want in a leader, for the most part. He's almost as defensive as Bonnie, and he has a pretty damn good matchup spread, besides GP Luffy. Even Shanks, he's not bad anymore, because before, Shanks used to be able to tech in the 10k Shanks and remove stuff, but since the new NL is 11k, it actually does mean you do have to kind of dedicate some resources to get there. But if GP Luffy and Shanks are avoided, NL kind of sweeps up these 3. Well, Blackbeard to a lesser extent, but still has a little bit of a better time. But NL really, his main strength is he beats, I legit think, most of the leaders down here. I think he beats, I would say 90% of the leaders below him, which is so good for his matchup spread. Like, yeah, he has some bad ones with, like, oh, if he really gets rushed down, or you really hit your perfect curve on some removal decks. I think NL is in a really good spot, and I think you cannot sleep on this leader. I think a lot of my local store treasure cups, NL is usually top 4. There's usually one NL player, and he makes it all the way top 4. And then there was also the event, I believe it was Eggman's Case Tourney, and he also caught top 8. So I think people are sleeping on NL. I would comfortably put him in top 6. No questions asked. I think he is just very strong. Next, we got Lim. Lim is the 5-cost machine. Just spits out 5 costs like crazy. And you got to deal with it. You got to answer it. You got to figure out how the hell you're going to get through this puzzle that is 4 bodies on turn 4, you know? If you could deal with it, it's pretty good. Now, I will say a lot of people are targeting 5 costs for removal. That was something that was in the last meta. That's persisting throughout this one as well. But Lim just has good matchups. She may lose to GP Luffy. I think it's about a 50-50, to be honest. But besides Shanks, she kind of beats these 3. You know, Lucci, Blackbeard, Bonnie, NL. I think she does well into NL too. So I think Lim just has good matchup spread. So having a good matchup spread, I think, is the most important, since we're in a more open format where people are playing a lot more options. So if you have a good matchup, you're probably in one of these 2 top tiers. Next, we got Pluffy, another one of those true 50-50ers. I mean, that's kind of what these 3 are. Honestly, Vegapunk's kind of similar, but really, Pluffy is kind of where I'd cut it at, like, okay, you will just have a reliable matchup spread, and there's going to be some matchups where you just get shafted by your consistency, or, oh, this is just the one bad matchup, and I happen to roll it. So I think these are the ones that you could feel pretty comfy about. Pluffy, obviously, less presence now, because previously, you know, the GP Luffy players, I feel like a lot of them come from being a Pluffy player. But Pluffy's one of those leaders, you see exactly what you need, and you'll just win. So if that happens, guess what? You're doing great for yourself. And I think he's still good, even in this meta. Just because being able to flood out in a 7 into a 5, still very strong. Obviously, GP Luffy can do a similar effect with the Sanji Pudding if you are running Luffy Taro. But you can't be understated how strong scaling to 10 Dawn so quickly is. And then also on top of that, I think healing in this meta is very powerful. A lot of the times people are looking for lethal, and they burn a lot of resources to look for lethal early in this meta. So being able to have a semi-consistent heal, which is where NL comes in, which is where Vegapunk comes in, which is where Pluffy comes in, is actually pretty beneficial for these leaders here. And you'll see quite a few yellow leaders on this list. Yes, it's not the strongest color. It's not topping the meta, you know, like the other colors besides blue. But I think it is consistent enough to the point where you can potentially win a tournament. Next, we'll go on to Vegapunk. Vegapunk obviously got some new tools in EB02 with that new 5-cost Vegapunk. Very logical that he'd be good. He gets to flood the board so hard, and with less Dofi in the meta, it means that he has just such an easier time playing the game. Before, Dofi kind of just outflooded Vegapunk and kind of cornered him out of the meta, but with Dofi less around, it really does become a lot more difficult for some of these leaders to deal with just how many bodies this guy spits out. And looking for lethal against Vegapunk is very tricky. He usually has about 16 outs in his deck that he could get him out of a lethal situation. So you have the 1-cost event, I Rayquaza Help. There's Shaka, if you see that in life. Some scenarios, if you see Edison in life, it'll get you out of stuff because you get to draw 2, trash 2. If you see Lilith, you can maybe search something important, you know. There's just a lot of options, and swinging life could be kind of tricky. Yes, he does run out of cards. That is one of the biggest downsides of Vegapunk. But if you're able to navigate that properly and you're able to find the lethal angles that people aren't expecting, you can definitely find some unexpected victories against leaders that were expecting to win, for sure. I myself have practiced this matchup a bunch because I think it's one of those that you really need to learn to be able to do well into. So, yeah, just like that, Vegapunk 1.5, no-brainer, really. Usopp, pretty interesting leader, obviously, blue-black, so a lot of card draw, a lot of removal. The only issue is he doesn't do good into, you know, 3 out of these 5 leaders. Like, he actually does lose pretty handedly to at least 3 of these leaders, maybe 4 even with the Blackbeard. So really, you're just counting on beating Lucci and then a lot of these lower tier decks. But that being said, he's a pretty consistent leader considering how many cards he draws, and then he also has multiple searchers to actually be able to get through a lot of the difficulty of a full day of play. So I'd still put him at that 10th spot. So he's my 10th leader to make it to the list. And then Reiju is going to be the last of the, you know, top 11, I guess, here for herself. I will say I've come from playing a Reiju in OP10. I think she's very solid, but her matchup spread is so atrocious in this meta. I think it is actually kind of miserable because she loses to GP Luffy. I know some people are going to say she wins. I think there's an angle here. I think it's maybe 45% for Reiju. But him Dawn minusing, if he doesn't have Sanji Pudding, you can just not have access to your babies into big boys. Or big girls, you know, with Reiju. So that's a pretty tricky matchup that you're going to have to grind out and figure out exactly what you want to do as Reiju. At the very least, you have Black Maria to be able to go back down in Dawn if you get too far ahead of this GP Luffy. But trust me, not easy at all. Still definitely a difficult matchup. And then Shanks, still hard. Even, you know, with Control Shanks, it may be even more difficult unless you super high roll all EGGs. Then we have Lucci. Lucci's still a good matchup. So that's your one. That's your one of the top 5 you win. Okay, Bonnie, also pretty difficult right now, I will say. She's still maybe like 45% win rate there. Bonnie could still lose, of course, if she gets rushed down, and then on top of that, when you do get Judge on the field, you can pretty much rest that Dawn every single turn. And then lastly, we have Blackbeard. I don't need to speak on how shitty Reiju into Blackbeard is. It just feels terrible. But that puts Reiju in a kind of awkward spot where she can kind of run the meta for most of this, so similar to these ones above her, which I really think that is what tier 1.5 is. You're consistent against the things below you, and you maybe have 1 or 2 matchups up here that you're able to win. But I think because she's so flexible as a leader, there are more angles to kind of steal away victories than some of the other leaders here. So, well, you know, we'll have to wait and see. I know she just recently got a 2nd place at a Treasure Cup, I believe. So, pretty interesting stuff there. So that puts her at 11. And then we have a hot take here. Odin. Obviously, I'm the Odin guy now because I happened to win a Store Treasure Cup with him. And I think he is in a really good spot in the meta. With the new addition of 6-cost Yamato, his curve is perfect. It is exactly what I want out of a curve. It has some flexibility. It has some kind of modularity. You have ample opportunity to get searchers. You're going to swing 777 as soon as you hit turn 2. Or turn 3, I guess. And that's really powerful. So I think Odin's just in a good spot. He's a little bit coin flippy where you need to kind of win dice rolls sometimes. But when he wins dice rolls, his good matchups become dominant. Blackbeard completely rolls over. GP Luffy is just straight up a winning matchup for Odin. 1st or 2nd, I think. 1st is a little more difficult, but if you're going 2nd, it's pretty consistent to be able to beat GP Luffy, just because you have access to stuff like Hody Jones, you have Mole Pistol. If you want to tech, you can tech in Electrical Luna. You know, there's a lot of options for this leader, and with the extra searchers, I think Odin is in a great spot. I'll be having another Odin video upcoming, talking about my deck list and how I did my victory, but that'll be it for another day, since I wanted to make this video first, talking about my overall big, broad perspective of the meta. And next we have RG Smoker. I actually considered putting this leader in Tier 2 Solid, but unfortunately, there were too many in Tier 2. So I ended up putting him 1 tier higher into Tier 1.5 just by proxy. So barely squeaking in here. And I think what it really comes down to is Restanding Dawn is just a really insane effect. And then on top of that, you get to play stuff like 8-cost Kid, Mole Gun, the same thing as Odin. The only thing is your consistency is pretty poor. Like, Odin is very consistent. I have never had a game where I'm just like, oh, I have no options as Odin. It's very, very rare. Whereas Smoker, I've seen it. I've seen the games where you search your first searcher with what's his name, Virgo, and you miss, and then the game's ruined from there because your tempo is just so bad and you're down a card in hand and people are swinging 6 at your life. I've been there. I've done that. I don't think it feels very good. But when you're high rolling, when you hit your perfect curve on Smoker, sometimes you just win. And you have enough good games like that, and you could really just clean up a lot of the meta. And I think Smoker has a decent matchup into most of these leaders, but especially GP. That's kind of what Smoker is well known for. So if you're just trying to beat GP Luffy, Smoker's not a bad choice. But good luck for a lot of the other matchups, especially if you low roll. So Smoker, I really debated putting in tier 2, but well, 1.5 sounds about right. Next, we got Doflamingo. Doflamingo, of course, the king of a previous meta. I still think it's tier 2. Honestly, could be tier 1.5. I think this leader is still good. Just the matchup spread's pretty difficult. Like, Shanks is harder with no Jinbei. Although I still think you win, but it's just tough. Same for Blackbeard. Like, it's just got a little bit more difficult, especially since now Blackbeard's going back to the removal style with things like Laboon, Doc Q, Van Augur. So, Doflamingo's a little bit more difficult in that way. Lucci is still Lucci, so, kind of a 50-50 matchup depending on what you see. And then Bonnie, still pretty good. So, Doflamingo, still a scary prospect. I've been playing Odin. If I see a Doflamingo, I'm terrified. I'm not going to lie, I'm terrified. So, like, stuff like that in this second tier can really be threatened by Doflamingo, which is what puts him in this top of tier 2. Next, we have Smoker. I mean, it's just Lucci light, to be honest, with some new stuff in EB02. I think this leader's kind of slept on. I think with the new Sengoku, you have a lot of combo potential for cleaning up games and finding unique angles to remove things. Also, just having a more consistent package is still very good. So I think Smoker's in a great spot. Could even see him tier 1.5 as well, but just needs the results to put him up there. Bello Betty and Zoro, we got the two rushers here. I think they're both solid. They have good matchups into GP Luffy, most importantly, and Blackbeard. So I think they still have a great chance here. Shanks is still difficult, though, so good luck. And, Lucci's kind of dependent on what you draw. If you draw really well as Zoro or Bello Betty, you could beat a Lucci. If you don't, it could be a little difficult. But I still think good position in the meta just because they beat GP Luffy. I just think they're a little bit less consistent against some of these other decks, which is why someone like Odin is up here versus them being slightly lower. Then we have Marco. Marco, man, I think this leader is so good, but just hasn't gotten the results to kind of back it up. Like, theoretically, your matchup spread should be great. I think you do well into Shanks, you do well into GP Luffy, you do well into Bonnie as well. Yes, Lucci and Blackbeard might be a bit more difficult, but doing well into 3 of the top 5, I think, should put Marco higher, but I just can't. I haven't seen him do anything. It's just unfortunate. He's also pretty consistent. He does get a little bricky. You might end up not finding enough counter for certain scenarios, but overall, he's still just super solid. I'm pretty surprised to see him just get no results. We have then Red Purple Luffy and Whitebeard. So these are the two 6K leaders. Obviously, we have the best of the top 6K leader up there with GP Luffy and then Odin as well. These are your other two. You got, obviously, we got Red Purple Luffy, who's much more control heavy, can really grind out games, has good matchups into Shanks especially for both these leaders. So I think either way, they're in a pretty good position in the meta. But it just is going to require some really, really solid pilots because both of these leaders are quite fragile. Luffy starts at 3 life. Whitebeard might as well start at 3 life. So, they're very similar in that way. But Luffy, you're playing to heal and kind of outgrind, whereas Whitebeard, you're looking to kill. So, 2 different styles for a similar leader, and I still think they're both good. And I think JCM has really shown off what Whitebeard can do, and Odin runs a similar package as well, so I think both these leaders are very good right now. Next, we got Kid. I think Kid is in an interesting spot. He wins a lot of the non-meta matchups, which just puts him here. He's kind of a tricky leader where some games he'll see exactly what he needs, and some games he'll just run out of cards because he doesn't draw enough cards to be able to counter out of everything. And he can get kind of bricked out because he doesn't have too much counter in hand usually, since he's relying on his blockers to keep him alive. So he also doesn't have a good way of dealing with 7 cost characters like some of the other leaders do. And he lacks the top end of an NL to be able to close out games. So a little bit less consistent than NL and Vegapunk, but still a very solid option in the meta. Gecko Moria is my sleeper pick. Honestly, really good leader, by the way. I think definitely has some good potential here, especially because removal is a little bit more scarce, and Moria being able to bring back bodies is definitely really good. And he should have an easy time targeting stuff like a 7-cost body. So I think is in a pretty good spot, and I would actually rate him. I think he could go up, but it's left to be seen. It hasn't happened just yet. Next, we got Nami. Nami is always going to be good. There is no scenario where she will be bad, but there's also no scenario where she's going to be running the meta anymore because of some of these other leaders. I will say she's a little bit down from where I had her in the last meta because GP Luffy is a rough matchup, straight up, and Blackbeard is pretty rough. But with Shanks running more control, oh my god, I think Shanks is going to have a terrible time into Nami. And Lucci, also has always kind of struggled since you don't have anything to remove, really, and you're just kind of looking to go wide with five swings. So, it's kind of an interesting position for Nami where she really gets dumpstered by 2 leaders, but can clean up 3 out of the 5. So I think it's pretty good, but still, there's a lot more rush and kind of quick kills in this meta. So I think Nami, that's really what kind of limits her as a leader, and that's why I put her in tier 2. Obviously, the right pilot, you're going to be more experienced in every matchup. So even if, sure, it's on paper a losing matchup, if you have more experience, you can find the lines, you'll be able to take the victory. But that's going to take the practice and the correct pilot. There's never a time where this leader will ever drop below tier 2, in my opinion. But we'll have to wait and see. Next, we got a kind of surprise pick here of ST14, I believe. Luffy. This is the black Luffy that becomes a 6K. So another one of those 6K leaders. But guess what? This one, it's got cost-based removal. So have freaking fun dealing with it. It just has some cool combos. And, this leader is only going to get stronger with some extra support in the next couple sets. So I think overall, kind of a sleeper pick. Could definitely go up a lot. Already has had some success in the format. So I think keep your eyes on this one. I don't really have too much else to add. Next, we got GY Law. Just straight up a potential leader, but just has no consistent matchups. No winning, dominantly. You have to grind out every game. You have to outplay your opponent. That's a rogue leader if I've ever seen one. If you're a good pilot, you can maybe squeak out some victories and get really, really good, but I just think he's a little bit too inconsistent and doesn't have any dominant matchups that you can kind of rely on. So that's what makes him tier 3. Next, we have Katakuri. I don't know. I played Katakuri in OP11, but he has a good matchup spread. He should beat Shanks. He should do... Lucci's still going to be difficult. GP Luffy, I believe, is slightly GP Luffy favored, but not that bad. Bonnie should be easy, to be honest. And then Teach... could be, 50-50, but he wins a lot of these other matchups that, you kind of need to win. So I don't know. I'm just in a weird spot where I think Katakuri's good, but I'm not sure if I'd place him higher than Rogue. He's kind of always good, similarly to Nami. It's just, is there the pilot, and do you get the luck on the day? And that's the kind of leader that I think is good in the game, but I don't know. I have a hard time placing him any higher. We got Boa Hancock. I think she's just lost her space a little bit. Like, not having Jinbei to be able to get out early bodies, to be able to actually survive and apply a little bit of pressure before you start removing things every turn. Definitely a little difficult. I still think she's pretty solid, since removal and drawing cards is always going to be pretty good. But it's just a lot more difficult in this current state of the meta. Next, we got Carrot. Carrot, kind of one of the leaders I wanted to test out, since should theoretically have a good GP Luffy matchup, but has yet to be seen, so we'll have to see how that goes. she kind of does get rolled by a lot of the other leaders in the top tables besides Bonnie. So, you know, she kind of beats 2 out of the 5, but it's not that consistent. You have to play perfectly with Carrot. Carrot is a very difficult leader, pretty fragile. If you ever let the floodgate open, it's probably doomed. And still, not seeing stage is rough, and that persists for this leader. But resting 5 costs, very powerful. So that's an effect that no leader in the game can disrespect, to be honest. Next, we have both of the kind of starter deck brothers, besides BY Luffy, who's in the grave down here. We got green, yellow, Ace, who actually has a great GP Luffy matchup, which is the main reason he's here. And then red, yellow, Sabu, who I think just does better into the field than blue, yellow, Ace. So pick your poison here. They're both great, being able to heal life and become higher power leaders to make it awkward for Luffy to play. But overall, still a lot of work. You know, not risk versus reward. Like, you need to put in so much time to get the results you'd expect of some of these easier leaders up here. So, I mean, same thing for Law. So that's why they're in this rogue tier. You need to work harder than other people, and that means that they're less meta. That's just how it goes. We got Yamato, I think just missing tools. Like, she needs stuff, which is where I hope the starter deck comes in and fixes her a little bit. But as it stands right now, just missing too many tools to be able to actually contend with the board. Like, yes, you can swing big into these into these leaders and really threaten lethal. And I almost lost to one when I did play in that Store Treasure Cup, just because of the pressure, and triggers are still triggers. But, you know, it's still pretty terrifying to play against Yamato, but she just doesn't have the board presence to be able to compete with some of these leaders. Next, we got Kalgara, a leader that does have the board presence to be able to compete, but runs out of gas as the game goes on. I think this leader will be very good when he gets his new support in OP12, which we just have been seeing get revealed recently. So definitely more things to come from this leader. But for now, yes, it's a little bit awkward to find all your pieces to be able to really dominantly close out a game before you kind of starve yourself of resources and end up losing. Next, we have Arlong. This leader is a couple cards short of being in this solid tier, I'd say. He's still not there, but I know OP11 he gets better. OP12 he's going to have some new cards too, so just wait. I think he's going to continue to get better. With the new 4-cost 6k buggy that with double attack, definitely got a really big benefit in that card especially. And lastly, we got all our Cope tier characters. These are just fun to play, but not very good, I think, in the meta currently. We got Buggy, whose matchup spread just got worse because Luffy is in the game, so I put him in Cope. He's going to need the support he's going to get, but he does do pretty well into some of the field, but I'd say having too many bad matchups in Tier 1 is going to put him at losing in Cope tier. We got Tony Chopper, my boy. Unfortunately, flooding 5 bodies that are all 4k and below isn't that strong, surprisingly. And his leader ability is just worse version of Zoro's, unfortunately. Is he fun, though? Oh, he's so much fun. Same for Red-Green Law. I think, you know, having small bodies when the best leader in the format becomes 6k, good freaking luck. Zonji, I think, is not terrible. The new Vivi really does change the dynamic of the deck, where you will always have cards in hand. So you should have a lot of counter power to be able to contend with bodies on board. And being able to swing twice is always good. But eventually, if you take, you know, it's still a 4-life leader that doesn't play that many blockers. So it could be kind of difficult to be able to survive. Next, we got ST21 Luffy. This leader always feels a little bit too high rolly. There's games where he just has no counter in hand. This is one of the leaders I can count on going for lethal when he has 5 cards in hand. You know, compared to some of these other leaders where if they have 5 cards, that's probably 4 2Ks. Where if this leader has 5 cards, it's probably 1 or 2 2Ks. So it's much easier to find lethal against him, and I think that's really what keeps him from being good, in my opinion. And also, you have to have Rested Dawn, which is just a little bit more restrictive than some of the other leaders. Next, we got Pudding and Robin, so our 2 PY leaders here. Unfortunately, they're Cope. They're too slow right now. Robin just has terrible matchups, and Pudding needs the support she's going to get in 11. I'm not sure if she's going to be strong enough to actually contend with the meta when 11 does actually come through, but it should be a lot more competitive. So expect more from Pudding in just a little bit. Next, we got Purple Black Luffy, who will be getting a ton of support with the starter deck. But just right now, in the Cope tier, you have to dedicate so many resources to set up this 10-cost Luffy combo. And if someone is able to survive that, good luck. That's all I'm saying. But I will say it's still a good leader just because it's black. At the end of the day, it does have that Sanji, which is very good. Sugar, I played a lot of Sugar in 10. I think she was pretty solid then, but I was unable to actually end up closing out any of my locals with her. Always going to be a fun leader. Always going to be super tricky for the opponent to actually deal with. And I think she has some really unique play lines that you can go for. And I've taken wins off of people who thought she was terrible and then realized, okay, there's some stuff here. But the problem is with this leader, as some other leaders like Odin as well, if she gets into a black matchup, good luck. Good luck. As soon as your Rosinante is gone, this leader is completely different. So I think that's the difficulty. And since you don't have any cost, you don't have access to stuff like the Going Merry that EB02 Luffy has, or Tashigi in green. So if there was a removal protection card for red and purple Don Quixote Pirates, I think this leader could honestly be up here in tier 2 or tier 3. But just because there's no removal protection, that just is going to keep her in Cope tier. BY Luffy, I don't need to speak. We move on. Next, we're going to talk about my leaders for EB02. What am I playing? Where am I going? Where am I thinking? Where's my head at? Stuff like that. And we'll just get right into it since this video is kind of dragging out because I just got a lot of thoughts about the game. These are my 4. Who would have guessed? We got 2 of the same from last time and 2 new faces with Odin, Carrot, Reiju, Robin. So Odin, obviously, I don't have to speak too much on, but it makes a lot of sense when I do go into more detail in the next video, as well as just in a little bit where I go through each of these leaders individually. Carrot, I just think has a cool meta perspective. Reiju, it's what I like playing, to be honest, and I think she's if she had better matchup spread, I would be playing her, to be honest, and she was kind of the first leader that I got into the game for, and then I ended up pivoting to Robin very quickly. And then we got Robin, who's just my favorite. So, why Odin? I think he has a good matchup spread. I think he beats GP Luffy, Blackbeard, Vegapunk, Reiju, and Usopp. Which, if you looked at my list previously, that is 5 leaders, or 6 leaders that are just in the top 10, basically. They're just all in the top 10. So, just for that, already really good. Really solid. Then, he also has a 50-50 matchup into Shanks and Pluffy. So that means that he beats GP Luffy, Blackbeard. 2 out of the top 5. And he also 50-50 Shanks. Yes, Lucci and Bonnie, the last 2 of the top 5, in my opinion, you do lose to. And it's pretty handed. But if you see anyone else, great. You're looking good. So, if I'm expecting, and my whole meta read is I'm just going to see GP Luffy over and over, I think Odin's in a great spot for that. And initially, when I was thinking about this leader, I thought, well, if it's the triangle format I initially talked about in this video, where it was GP Luffy beats Blackbeard, Blackbeard beats Shanks, Shanks beats GP Luffy, he would have won 2 out of that 3, and 50-50 the last one, which, that would be amazing. Unfortunately, that's not how the meta actually went out, but I think that was still what my idea ended up being, and just like that, I mean, I think he's still really solid, and I think my results also show it, so, yeah. And Pluffy, if he high rolls, yeah, you probably lose, but any normal game against Pluffy, you have a very good chance to 50-50 win. He isn't fully dice roll reliant. He does like to go second. I know this is kind of knowledge that I shouldn't be imparting, but he does kind of need to hit this dice roll. Obviously, there's some builds that actually prefer going first. My build is a build that does like going second, so getting the dice roll and winning it, definitely very important. Especially since GP Luffy also likes going second, so definitely a pretty interesting look there. He's very consistent. I know some people will say he's not consistent. I have built a deck that feels very consistent. So just based off that proxy, really good leader. I think he has cool tech options with stuff like Mulgun, with stuff like Hody Jones, with stuff like Monkey D. Dragon. You can run Whitebeard. You can run special blockers. You know, you have a lot of options. And then he's a 6K leader defensively with access to Ezo, and Ezo can pitch a brick for 2K. He just has a lot of counter in hand, and he gets to play a vanilla stat line character. There is a lot to like about Odin, and that's why I selected him. And the last bullet point is, of course, Hody frickin' Jones, man. This guy, this Hody Jones is so important. Being able to rest down Dawn against GP Luffy especially really puts him in the conversation. The only downside is, yes, you lose to NL, Lucci, and Bonnie, and those are pretty much your worst matchups. If you don't see them, hey, you're feeling great. I'm not going to lie. So, honestly, Odin, I think, is a good meta look and deserves to be in at least tier 1.5. Next, we got Carrot. Carrot has a great, well, I wouldn't say great, GP. He has a good GP Luffy matchup, which is really what you're looking for, and Carrot is super fun to play. You get to restand Dawn. You get to rest things down. You also get to contest board. You're also freezing things every turn. People get frustrated. Now, the only downside of Carrot really is, well, it's a downside and an upside, is she is extremely difficult to pilot. I think you have to be rock solid in your game plan. You have to know what you're going to do for the next 3 turns every single time. And if your hand, you know, your cards in hand don't have plans 2 to 3 turns down the road, you might just lose, because you need to have a plan about how to freeze something and what you need to swing into. You need to know, okay, I don't have enough freeze this turn to be able to keep everything frozen, so I need to be able to swing into some characters. Issue, you know. She can go for lethal in extremely unique positions, because she can rest down blockers and go for Hody Jones in the same turn. Awesome. Really good combo there. And you get to restand Dawn after Hody Jones, so you actually basically, if you have your full setup up, Hody Jones is a 5 Dawn play, and you have 5 more Dawn to attach to things and swing. That is very powerful. Now, the problem is keeping her pieces alive on the board, so you have to run things like Tashigi and even Rosinante if you want to actually be able to consistently guarantee that you're able to survive. But, you know, she is 5 life, so she has that benefit going for her, and she's much more consistent now with the new 2K Carrot that can search out Zoe. The only issue with Carrot, really, I feel like, is you have a lot of 2Ks that are good, but you kind of want to play out at least 3 per game. Your Tashigi, the removal protection Tashigi, the 2K Carrot, the one that you search out Zoe and cheat out Zoe for 1 Dawn, and then Milky, who's also a 2K that you get to restand a Dawn every turn. So overall, there's issues with this leader for sure, but I think the funness of her kind of outweighs all that. And then, yeah, of course, downside is she lacks tempo to close out games. Unless you're able to get a 10-drop Dofi on the board, which I think is really what you're playing for, is 1 10-drop Dofi on board and then go for game. And you have to be swinging life at least a little bit to be able to threaten some cards out of hand and stuff like that. There is difficulty with actually closing out games for sure, so I think that's where she kind of falls short, and that makes some of her matchups more difficult. If they could just print some sort of Minx top end, instantly a good leader. I'm not even kidding. But with how it currently stands, just not the thing. Bandai, if you're listening, I know you're not. Bandai, if you're listening, print like a dual, like Inuarashi and Nekomamushi card, and that'll be the top end. I think that's a good idea, but, you know, that's for another day. Also, she gets to play Electrical Luna, and it's searchable. Have fun. Next, we have Reiju. I had really good success with her in OP10. I was like 1K counter off of making a Nats. But unfortunately, I fell a little bit short. She's fairly consistent. I know some people are like, oh, she's like super high roll-y. No, I think once you learn the lines and once you learn what you're looking for in the leader, she is fairly consistent. There are just going to be a couple games where, damn, I got no ETGs. They're all put in life or they're all stuck in the middle of my deck. But for the most part, you're able to actually grind through your deck hard enough, quick enough, to be able to actually see the cards you need to see. Having cards in hand is extremely valuable in this meta, and there's no one better at refilling your hand than Reiju. That's just the facts there, since she always draws a card no matter what. She also beats 90% of the rogue leaders. Like, that's one of the greatest strengths of Reiju, is she just beats the field really well, loses to the meta. Very interesting. She's also very pilot dependent, and that's the kind of stuff I like when a leader is difficult to where you don't have a streamlined play. I know people are going to get pissed at me, but Bonnie and Shanks are like super straightforward, right? There's usually one good play to make, maybe two. Reiju, oh my god, you could go through the entire decision tree and still not figure out exactly what's the best option. So there's a lot of decision making, a lot of kind of thoughts you have to do, and then you have to think a lot more now with GP Luffy as well, who's Don minusing, you're Don minusing. It's a battle, you know, since you both kind of need to be under Don. I saw some interesting tech as well for Reiju that I think you could leverage to maybe beat GP Luffy, but we'll have to save that for another time. And yeah, the downside is just a bad matchup spread. And lastly, of course, we got Nico Robin. Why Robin? Because I'm coping. Yeah, that's all I got. She's coping. She's just not good. I'm sorry. No, just kidding. Okay. So actually, she beats a lot of the decks targeting to beat GP Luffy. So in that way, she's like the anti-meta. The anti-meta to the anti-meta. Where she beats like Odin. She beats like these kind of rogue leaders that are trying to beat. She beats Smoker as well. Like, these leaders that are pined at beating GP Luffy just so happen to be very weak into Robin. Now, if you ever see a GP Luffy or a Shanks, just scoop. But you get insane bracket luck, and you could maybe have yourself a victory. Bullet point 2, you could read that one. And then finally, more choices for deck building. I feel like this leader gives me decision fatigue. I'm like looking at cards like constantly. Okay, how many triggers do I want to have in the deck? What top end do I want? Am I going more life burn? Am I going more control? Am I trying to kind of play the mid-rangey with some more bodies? Am I playing trigger bodies? Am I playing KO triggers? Like, there is so many options, and unfortunately, it just doesn't feel like there is one cohesive list that kind of bundles everything up together for Robin that is exactly what she wants, to the point where that is what the leader is, and like can really highlight her strength. She has a little bit of an identity crisis, because if Robin had more cards in hand, great. It doesn't matter as much that you're, you know, burning triggers from your hand to add to ramped on. But as it currently stands, you don't have the cards and counter to really reliably do that. And yes, you have to just rely on Gum Gum Giant. It's so stupid. There just needs to be more support. I know there's the Jaguar D Sol coming out in 11 that draws you cards, but I'm not even sure if that's going to be good enough, because right now I think the better version of Robin is the more aggressive, look for lethal in tricky positions version of Robin, than the one that's like, oh, let's play control, which is I like playing the control Robin, but really it is more about playing out your strong rush characters, playing out some life burn, and being able to go for lethal while making sure you have hand pressure with Banish. But 6K leaders are kind of the name of the game right now, so that could be a little bit more difficult. Downsides, terrible matchup spread. I mean, it's just frustrating. And she really needs new support. I think she just definitely needs help from Bandai. So that pretty much wraps us up for this video. My EB02 meta discussion is now complete. I hope this was a good time for you, because definitely a good time for me. Thank you for sticking around for the whole video. Expect more content soon, especially that Odin deck breakdown slash my thoughts kind of about how he is and what you're kind of looking to do. I'm looking to do a little bit more analysis as far as One Piece is going, just because I'm getting to the point where I don't need to open up these older booster boxes. And then on top of that, I think I'm getting better as a player where I can really talk about what I'm thinking and where I'm going. So I'm glad to be able to win my first tournament. If you haven't seen, yeah, that's what this is from. So that should be a good segue into me making more content that's a little bit more analytical. And I really wanted to win so that I could not necessarily prove to people, but it's like it gives me credit as a player that I'm able to take out some good players on my way to a victory. So it shows that I'm not crazy in the things I'm talking about. So thanks for sticking around, and if you liked, please like. If you liked, also subscribe. You know, I will try and make videos as I can. I am a bit busy, and then also I like to go to locals at least twice a week, so that really does take up a lot of my free time. But I'm always happy to talk to anyone about any of my thoughts, to be honest. So definitely leave a comment down below, and I'll try and read it and respond to it as quickly as possible. But thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. I know it's only a couple hours left, but enjoy it nonetheless. And if you're watching this at a later time, just enjoy life in general. Thanks for watching. There will be a recommended video here that YouTube will put up, so click on that if you're interested. But anyways, that's been all from me. Golden Gat out.